So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna do some greatest hits from Johnny, and then I'm gonna read a little part of since I laid my burden down. Um, so Johnny is about a waiter who works in the Castro and is really bored and writes in his diary in between customers. We'll start with an epilogue, and then it'll be a story about a natal chart, and then witchcraft. All right, here we go. This is the epilogue for Johnny Would You Love Me If My Dick Were Bigger, Chapter 1. 3 days after Johnny told me he loved Michael more because his dick was bigger, I began to get all affected. First, I started binge eating, then I started cutting myself, then I took control. I did some yoga, I rinsed out my ass, I moisturized, I put on a pair of black Calvin Klein mesh briefs, black Levi's skinny jeans, monochrome black Adidas, black gloves, black faux football face paint like Left Eye from TLC, rest in peace, and a black skull cap, a gold chain, and one diamond earring. I sprayed on some Calvin Klein's Obsession. I either looked like a hip cat burglar or a member of Black Bloc. It was time for justice. In a black bag, I put a black rope with a grappling hook attached to the other end and a brick with a note attached. I snorted some eggs left over from the night before for a calming effect and hopped on my bike en route to Johnny's apartment. I locked up my bike and shimmied up the side roof ladder to the top of the 4-story apartment building. From there, I took the grappling hook and rappelled down the side of the building till I was on the ground, looking up at the second-story apartment window. Now, I could have just walked to the other side of the building from the sidewalk, but I was addicted to the drama of the grappling hook. I said a prayer to Ogun, the African god of war, and with solid aim and dexterity threw the brick through Johnny's window, laughing my ass off as I ran back to my bike. I imagined the look on Johnny's face when he took the note off the brick, revealing the message written in crayon, "Johnny, would you love me if my dick were bigger?" 2 months later, Johnny forgave me and threw a brick through my window with a note attached that said yes. Don't clap at that shit. That's sad. That's fucked up. It's hard. Okay, here we go. Natal chart. My evil therapist had won again. I was coming down off of a 2-week drinking binge and needed something to whine about, so I scheduled an appointment with my therapist, even though that bitch is my own worst enemy. I bitched for 2 hours straight with vigor about being 30, single, with no hope of fitting in and finding a stable mate in sight. Everybody I date eventually wants to hit me, I explained. She told me I had to start putting myself in the boyfriend mindset. My assignment was to go to IKEA with my imaginary boyfriend, mind you, and start picking out pieces of cute yet cheap Euro bullshit to decorate our imaginary apartment with. I got high naturally and was so carried away that before I knew it, I was in the parking lot of IKEA with $700 worth of shit I didn't need and no way to get it back to my imaginary apartment because I didn't have an imaginary car. I could have kicked my imaginary boyfriend's ass for not taking control of me and the situation. I felt like my therapist had done this on purpose to humiliate me, and it was time to admit that therapy wasn't working. I had been going to therapy for 10 years, and I was still a raging sex addict and a fucking creep. Like, what the fuck was the point? Just as I was finally about to admit that maybe the problem was me, I had another idea. I had a better crack at internal healing if I just paid $5 to a psychic and mapped out my natal chart, underlined my negative qualities, and either ignored them or worked on them. So I did. Date of birth, time of birth, location of birth, July 2nd, 1982, 6:11 p.m., Athens in Alabama. Okay, we're going to go through this shit. Sun in Cancer. He has a strong survival instinct and a reputation for moodiness. He is sensitive and impressionable. He is easily influenced. He can sometimes be manipulative. Sun in the eighth house. He often goes further and deeper than most. He has a magnetic quality and is attracted to the taboo areas of life. He often retreats to a dream world. He may become a drug taker. Okay, last one. We're going to do this one here, and then we'll get to this one. Witchcraft. I was an American waiter bored at work. I was also a practitioner. I went to my local Wiccan priestess and asked rather earnestly, how do I fuck someone up? With a willowy, enchanted voice, she said, young soul, remember the law of threes and that we must always spread peace and love and light. See, clearly this bitch was on one, but if I walked around dressed like Stevie Nicks, circa gypsy, I'd be all peace and love about shit too. I was over this West Coast woo-woo shit. The spirits crowned above my head wanted war. I knew I would have to honor that or face the consequences. I called my aunt back in Alabama, who was a conjure. I love nasty deep south hoodoo shit because it was meant to kill people. I asked my aunt rather sheepishly, Auntie, how do I fuck somebody up? It's easy, she said. Here's how. 1, take an egg straight from the chicken's duke. And I don't want to be tiptoeing around urban farms at night, so I just went to Whole Foods and got an organic one. 2, write your enemy's name on it as small as you can, followed by run, run, run. 3, go to a non-landlocked body of water and stand with your back to it. 4, say the sacred chant, fuck that motherfucker, fuck that motherfucker, fuck that motherfucker. 5, toss the egg over your left shoulder into the water. I did all this bullshit and I breathed a breath of relief. This was the last time Quentin Tarantino was going to assault my senses with his tawdry bullshit ever again. Quentin's right there. I'm just joking, Quentin. Like, I'm joking. He's like not here. So this is Since I Laid My Burden Down. It's the newest book. It's about this guy, this character who's originally from down south but goes to California and has a subcultural experience and a breakdown. His junkie boyfriend dies and his uncle dies. And then he has to go back to Alabama and work in his mother's church and ends up having an affair with a youth minister. In this passage, he's cleaning up the room of the dead boyfriend. But he's also remembering about the first guy he ever hooked up with. I need a drink for this. It's like some heavy shit, right? The lover's name is Arnold. The character's name is DeSean. Under a pile of exhausted art supplies, DeSean found Arnold's Nirvana t-shirt. It smelled like hell and sparked more memories than he cared for. Besides being one of Arnold's favorite bands and one of his favorite shirts, there was the historical baggage loading it down. DeSean remembered April 4th, 1994. He was in 6th grade. He remembered a cold and windy pre-spring day and his hatred of the school bus that dropped him off at home. He remembered turning on MTV and fucking losing it. Kurt Loder. Kurt Loder was on the screen. Kurt Cobain had killed himself, shot himself right in the head. In 7th grade, DeSean ditched Sunday school and Bible study and started running with his middle school's premier group of headbanger girls, Margaret Lopez, Amelia Andrews, Riela Ballers, and one girl whose name he couldn't remember. A year to the date of Kurt's death, the crew held a satanic seance under the stairs by the drama room, a very, very failed effort to raise the spirit of Kurt Cobain. DeSean didn't care about the seance being not so successful. He was just happy that these girls had invited him in and stamped his cool card. They were all black. They smoked weed. they were sort of sexually active. Margaret had been rumored to have been fingered the summer before, and they practiced Satanism. How fucking cool was that? It was a rather poor seance. The coven ducked under the stairwell in as much of a circle as the space would allow. Margaret lit a black candle and laid a picture of Kurt on the ground. Everyone except DeSean was wearing black lipstick. They all held hands and believed together. It became apparent to DeSean after 2 minutes that he had no fucking clue as to what sign they were waiting for that would tell them that Kurt had indeed intercepted their message in the spiritual realm. All he knew was that after a minute of believing, the bell rang and they were tardy to class and all facing detention. They had left the stairwell feeling defeated. Why hadn't Kurt answered them? Now, in all small towns, people talk. One of DeSean's bitch-ass Christian cousins ratted to his mom that he was hanging out with white girls who worshiped Satan. His mother, furious per usual, showed up to his room that night, foaming at the mouth. "Are you a headbanger? Do you be at school banging your head?" She said the word headbanger with the salty peculiarity of a woman saying with active disdain a word that she had never known existed. She beat his ass and took all his Nirvana records and left to spend the night at her boyfriend's house. The little hero inside DeSean stood, post-ass beating, all rage, his body covered in red whelps. He was trying to catch his breath. "My mom is such a bitch." In one statement, a whole new life began. In a plot twist that he would figure out when he was older, DeSean experienced an epiphany. He didn't like Nirvana because he knew what the fuck Kurt Cobain was talking about. He liked Nirvana because it pissed off his bitch-ass mom. The devil's music was still doing his job, still prompting kids to leave a nowhere life. The night of getting his ass beat by his mom would crescendo into a body of work, a community, a purpose. Now, all those kinky banger girls from middle school were posting pictures of kids on the computer screen, a view into their normal lives. They lived in places like Texas and Kansas. They had houses now and families. DeSean looked up and all he knew was musicians. Every boy he had ever loved had either been a musician or a drug addict, usually both. It was a yucky realization, but it kept to certain themes in life of stubbornness, of going longer, harder, of always being the last to leave the party. All he could think about now, as he cleaned Arnold's room, was his first boyfriend, Jatius. Men become pieces of shit either because they've had their ass beat too much or because they've never had their ass beat a day in their life. Prime example was DeSean's first boyfriend, Jatius McClaskey. Jatius had his ass beat every day of his life, and that's what had killed him. John McClaskey was Jatius's younger brother and DeSean's arch nemesis. They played in the cotton field behind his boyhood house, and as far as John was concerned, it was always open season on DeSean's ass. He would hurl dirt clods at his head and call DeSean faggot so much that DeSean started to believe that he was indeed one. Sometimes when John beat him up, both boys' mothers would come out and stop the commotion. DeSean didn't understand it at the time, but behind all this animosity was competition, plain and simple. John hated the way his older brother favored DeSean. Whenever the neighborhood boys played ball, Jatius would stop to help DeSean with his throw. He would take him on walks in the woods or help him when his bike had a flat. In a neighborhood where dads were scarce, male attention was a commodity, and DeSean would sense this competition well into his adult male gay life. Jatius McClaskey is what you would call a specimen. By age 15, he looked like a right grown man. Beard, muscles, chest hair, a towering 6'1" frame, and a big and obvious bulge in his pants where a big and obvious bulge should be. Edna McClaskey, his mother, had quite a time keeping all the neighborhood moms off of her handsome son. So it happened one summer when DeSean was 11 that Jatius touched him in a way that an older boy should never touch a younger one. This excited DeSean something crazy but confused him also. Either way, he figured that he didn't mind and that he wanted more. The McClaskeys lived behind DeSean's backyard and up the cotton field. His mom would leave for her boyfriend's house, and DeSean would leave his baby brother sleeping in the crib and go see Jatius. He would run up the cotton field and through the moonlight. He would run so fast beside objects so dark it felt like he was flying, white cotton against moonlight and fireflies. It all looked a certain way. That summer, Jatius showed him his first porn. Jatius's dick was the first he had ever touched. Fuck it. Jatius's dick was the first that he had ever touched. DeSean grabbed it and was flushed with it the way he imagined a small stroke to feel. Later that summer, DeSean watched from a tree through Jatius's window as he had sex with Teresa Watkins. Jatius and DeSean carried on up until the next summer, and then they would stop forever. Edna McClaskey was an overworked and overstressed single mother, one of the few women around with a college education. She had worked on the Army base from the time she got pregnant with Jatius. You could imagine this woman's head hitting the glass ceiling so goddamn hard that there was blood running down her face. She was a nervous woman. DeSean remembered sleeping over at the McClaskey's house once and Edna waking them up at 1 a.m. with a vicious racket. "You worthless bastards, get up, get the fuck up. Y'all gonna clean this dirty fucking house. Y'all gonna clean this dirty fucking house until I get tired." DeSean would understand later, as we always understand much later, why Jatius, despite being a teen sex god, also wore the look of a defeated man well before his expiration date, and then shit really hit the fan. Jatius worked as a cashier at the local Piggly Wiggly. It was around the 4th of July that Jatius was caught giving Teresa Watkins $126 worth of free meat through his checkout line. He got fired and everyone knew why. Edna came home from work early that day and beat her son within an inch of his life. After she left the house, Jatius got her gun from the closet, went into his room, and blew his brains away. DeSean walked into Jatius's room a day and a half later. He walked past John, who was in the living room, staring silent and far away at a wall. DeSean's mother was amongst the neighborhood women consoling Miss McClaskey and cleaning the blood from the carpet. It just wouldn't come up, his mother said in a tidy way as she was baking a pie for the funeral dinner. She said one more very tidy thing. "You don't kill yourself over a job at Piggly Wiggly," she spat, all glowing and prophetess-like as she put another pie in the oven. DeSean, being the little ingenue he was still ignorant of the larger metaphors at work around him. He didn't know the world for what it was yet, one large, conniving, goddamn Piggly Wiggly. While silently watching his mother wrap tinfoil around other baked pies, he made a mental note of her implication. It's okay to steal from grocery stores, but it's not okay to die. Thank you. There were men that I hated, but then there were men that I loved.
Please welcome back Brontez Purnell. I think one of the fun things about you is my strategy is always to like present too much stuff for people to like comprehend, and I can't even do that with you because you've got too much. I mean, like before we came in here, the wonderful folks at 356 Mission Road, thank you so much, Leah and Ethan and Anthony and everybody. Always write an email that says, "What music would you like to play before?" And I was like, "Should we play Younger Lovers?" And Brontez was like, "Girl."
Fuck no. Like, and no, ew. And like sometimes like I'll be like, I'll be at some like party or something, and somebody's like, "Let's play Hella Nervous," and I'm just like, I almost died during that period of my life.
When I lived in Brooklyn still, Bjork was popping up at random gay bars. That's when we still had hope in her most recent record to be like a banger. Because we were like, oh, she's like broke up with Matthew Barney, she's like clubbing. And she went into the place that I would go all the time, Bath Salts, until Macy Rodman did a sort of dedication to Bjork and played It's Oh So Quiet. And she ran out because like Bjork hates that song. Anyway.
Good for her. If she can't take control of her own destiny, who will?
Let's talk about voice. I'm like segueing into notes terrain. I mean, even between the two books that you just, here, I'm gonna just hold this thing. Even between the two books that you just read from, there's like such a dramatic shift in tone. I mean, you're reading them, so you're here, and your human tone is there. But like, if you read the two books, they read very dramatically differently. And before that, even Fag School was even more chatty, if you will. How did you come to the tone or the idea to make something like Since I Laid My Burden Down?
Originally, when I wrote Since I Laid My Burden Down, it originally really was supposed to be my like Tyler Perry meets Tennessee Williams novel. Like I always wanted to do like my version of a Southern Gothic novel. And so that was the whole idea. Also, it was inspired by the fact, that there was like a lot of sad shit going on, like in my life, and in particular, and also just like the lives of a lot of my friends too. So I mean, it's the same, but it's definitely not peppy in tone, or it'll be peppy, but it's like, it's like some rough shit.
But even going from Fag School to your first book, I mean, did you sit down and you were like, it's time to write a book? Like when you did what was it, Rubles and Rubes, or the original publishers of Johnny, Would You Love Me If My Dick Was Bigger?
No, yeah, oh God. When I was writing Fag School, in my head, I was an intern at like Sassy and 17 magazine, cause I had always wanted to do that, but missed the boat. So Fag School was like, I work at Sassy, right? But like, Johnny, Would You Love Me If My Dick Were Bigger? I was writing for Maximum Rock and Roll at the time, and so I was just like, I actually Johnny, Would You Love Me started as just like short stories I decided to put for my column in Maximum Rock and Roll. And then I think a friend of mine was just like, why are you writing this shit for these straight boys? Just write a fucking book. You're not getting paid anyway. And then I got the Radar writing residency. And so I was just like, okay, yeah, I'll do it. And by that time, gosh, I was 28, 29. I had enough bad experiences with men to write a book, but I was just young enough to still be peppy.
But that's the thing that I keep getting hung up on with this new one, and with this movie too. You've got DeSean, who I know you well enough to know that there's a bunch of Brontez in there. But DeSean is not Brontez. And when we talked before about this, you were really adamant to be like, DeSean is not Brontez. Can you talk a little bit about why you decided to make this kind of alter ego? Is it an alter ego? And who is DeSean?
If I had an alter ego, their life in my head would be better. I think in my head, DeSean is a total of my experiences, my girlfriend's experiences, my best fag's experiences, kind of I don't know, kind of this, originally when I thought about it, how do you pronounce it, Knights of Cabria? No, yeah, in my head, I always saw me and my friends as that character, this hip, young mod Italian girl, just going through some shit, but still being hip at the end. So it was kind of filtered through a bunch of fucking shit like that. And so, but also sometimes I feel it's a negative, it's a reverse image. Cause even in book and even in there, I feel that character freaks out at places I would be cool and is way too cool at places I would freak out. So it's always fun to deal with that back and forth.
Yeah, you've talked about him as a kind of sketch character in the past, and I like the idea. I think you said if you see him react to certain things, you can about see where he comes from.
No, yeah, someone who on paper looks like an illegible character, but then when they get to speak for themselves, you're like, oh no, I do shit like that all the time. Oh, now I get it. which I think is a better way to like, as opposed to like, this is a good character and this is a bad character and this is why we should like this guy. Like, you ever, what the fuck is that shit? Remember when we were kids, highlights? Do you remember Goofus and Gallant? You remember thinking that Gallant was just such like a fucking asshole? Like, didn't you want to beat that kid up? Like, and Goofus just seemed like so fun, right? They're like, Goofus eats jelly off of his knife. I'm like, yes.
Yeah, I mean, that's something that you talk about a lot with the like idea of, well, the idea of sort of self-worth in the book becomes up a lot. Like who would be my boyfriend? How can this character without a boyfriend validate himself? I think that ends up becoming one of the important strains throughout the book of having a kind of really flawed character, a character who perhaps looks illegible outside of the confines of his own logic, but like actually in a lot of really great ways doesn't find a sense of self-value, but is on track to arrive at a sense of self-value in the book.
No, yeah, for sure. Like, and just, I don't know, and it's harder, like, I think it's just like, since he doesn't fit some of that mold, probably he does have self-value, it just doesn't look the way it classically does. So somebody like him is always gonna have a harder time coming at that. But there's plenty of exchanges in that book and in that scenario where you're like, actually this person does value themselves, but it just looks different. You know what I'm saying? Like, that's definitely something I feel like I've had a hard time explaining to people, or when I talk to more like, you know, people that aren't you, they're like, really? He just seems like a creep. But it's like, I don't know, he seems like my best friend.
So then is your first sort of like flirtation with this DeSean character that you've been thinking about 100 Boyfriends Mixtape, or were you already working on the novel when the opportunity to make 100 Boyfriends Mixtape came along, or the short that is 100 Boyfriends Mixtape?
They actually both came along simultaneously.
So you had this sort of figure in mind, and
Yeah.
the idea with 100 Boyfriends Mixtape is a la I Want Your Love, right? A short is made, and if it generates enough interest, then a feature will come out of it. Is that right?
Yeah, I'm actually here right now at Jack Shamama's house writing the full length. That's another reason I came to LA.
But also that's going to be a book too. I was kind of curious about ideas of like intentionality of like, you know, the first book came out on a sort of small poetry press. Was it a poetry press or like?
No, it's Mike, and he was in this band, the Phantom Surfers. I don't know if any of y'all remember that, but literally, like, he was just like, man, you know, I'd really like to, Brontez, you got it. I'd really like to put out your book, you know. I'm just like very like, oh God, don't you just love Bay Area white punk dads, you know? They'll like pay for shit. Like, you can say some crazy shit. They'll fund it. So.
And then after that, City Lights didn't want to put out a book with Dick in the title, but then Feminist Press snatched up both Dick and Since I Laid
Feminist Press snatched up Dick.
You know what I mean. But like, where do you see, like, and then the next thing is going to be a longer form version of 100 Boyfriends Mixtape. Like, how do you, when you're like thinking up like a project, how do you see it going out into the world? Like, how do you see these two books on Feminist Press getting published at the same time? Like, how do you see those going out into the world right now?
I don't ever see anything. I just wait for it to come back to me, and hopefully it's like good. Like, sometimes I get into a lot of awkward conversations, but luckily I drink enough to where I can handle anything.
And then the next project that you have coming up too is a feature-length documentary on Ed Mock, which I got to see today, which is very great. How did that come about? How do you, I mean, one thing that I'm always like sort of enamored with in wonder of is your ability to like balance all these disparate things. Like, you know, there's like 4 months to go out and record, and then there's like writing a book, publishing a book, and then there's, you know, all of like making a film takes years. Can you talk a little bit about the making of who is Ed Mock and the making of this Ed Mock documentary that'll come out in the next year?
So Ed Mock was a gay black experimental choreographer, performer that lived in the Bay from about 1968 to his death in 1986. And it was right at the time that I did this movie Free Jazz that was like this black and white compilation of like my dance company shit. And this woman who's a professor at Berkeley saw it. Her brother is a gallery owner, and she was just like, oh my God, I used to dance with this guy when I was 13 in the 70s. Like, his name was Ed Mock. You should check him out. And then she did this 5-hour public traveling performance piece. That was kind of a eulogy to him because he never got one. It went all through the mission. And then I just investigated his life. There's this thing called the Museum of Performance and Design in San Francisco that has a lot of really cool records of a lot of cool underground artists from like the Bay and beyond. And so there was a lot of his shit, and I was like, oh, like, this should happen. Like, and I had never done a documentary before. And also, like, maybe I won't say this. Like, no, it's crazy how fucking grant funding works too, because it's like every time you write a grant, you have to pretend like you're saving the fucking world. And so if I say, oh, I want to do a dance about marijuana, they're just like, ha ha ha. But I'll be like, I'm gonna do a fucking documentary about, you know, this black man who's a choreographer and like he passed away, and they're just like, yes, child. Oh, you know what I mean? Like,
I'm watching the documentary on my computer, and Brontez was taking a nap on the couch, and as soon as Brontez comes on doing like the talking head of meaning, he's like, grant writing bullshit, and then goes back to sleep.
I hate how fucking capable you have to sound, and like you're like, okay. You know what I mean? Like, you sit in meetings with those people and you're just like, oh my God, I can't let them know that I'm a fucking crazy person. Like, I can't let them know I'm a fucking crazy person. You be saying words like, essentially. You know what I mean?
Well, this is a Q&A, and that opens out to the audience, too. Are there any cues in the A of our audience? Yes. Oh, and there's a... Great, Mike.
I'm a horrible question. Oh, wait. I know how to do these things, but it doesn't matter. You can hear me? All right. So, I've got my lipstick on it. So, but what you were just saying about like how you have to use these words and everything, I was thinking about how that whole imposter feeling and things like that, and how you have moved not just from, you know, punk fans and punk band, but, you know, into like, yeah, making films and having a dance troupe and writing books. And it's like, how did you get to that point of feeling like you could enter those worlds officially or non-officially and do it? I think that's amazing that you just, how did you do it, or how did you get there?
I think like the whole DIY movement like is both like could be like a big blessing or a big curse. Like I feel like both, you know, but it really was just like you can try it and you can put it out there and you can see like if it works or not. And the thing about it is what it really taught me, like being like a punk growing up and just listening to so much DIY music, is that I'm not afraid to fail at something. Like, I'm gonna try it, and after I try it, it's either I'm never gonna do that again, or, and this is the important part, I'm gonna do that again and I'm gonna do it better, you know? So, and it was also like, and plus in my head, there's never any other choice. What else are you gonna do but do it again and do it better? Like, and I still believe in like DIY shit. I love that because it's like, I see so much shit that they still throw us a bunch of bullshit like with a bunch of money behind it, and think that I'm too fucking stupid to clock them. And so I'm just like, if they can fucking get away with that, then certainly I can get away with fucking doing something that's like intentional and important to me, you know? So, and your band also, like Bratmobile, huge inspiration to me. Like, yes.
I'm stuck in punk damage, I think, sometimes. And so, yeah, I was wondering, how do you get out of the punk damage?
I have not gotten out of the punk damage. Like, when, oh my God, like whenever I do something, or me like showing, sometimes I feel like my aesthetic too, just showing it around like the people who are supposed to be like the gatekeepers still feels like I'm like the awkward punk kid in middle school, and they're all being like, well, you should have did this, and you should have did that. And blah, blah, blah. Like, so I've never escaped it, but I'm also in my head not afraid to be like, the whole time they're like talking to you in my head, I'm just like, fuck you, fuck you, fuck you, you still talking, bitch, fuck you. Let me do my thing.
Seeing you present for the first time the Brontez Purnell Dance Company in New York really struck that chord on home, because Bill T. Jones was really into it, but like everyone else who organized the festival was horrified by the mess that you made on the stage. And it was like the most beautiful, like, I'm performing in a New York City theater space punk gesture of like, and out comes the talcum powder, and it's gonna get everywhere. And like Bill T. Jones was like, yes. And all of the tech people were like, fucking motherfucker. Like you could hear them just fuming.
No.
I was sitting in the back row.
No, seriously. And don't you love when people like come up to you and they're like, you're never gonna work in this town again, and you're just like, I never worked in this town before. Like, any more questions?
Yeah, come on, questions.
Oh, push through.
Come on, Michael Lannon.
You said you were peppy. You were still peppy when you wrote Johnny. And do you think you're not peppy now? And if not, what replaced that? Or like, where are you now with that?
It's always, well, not peppy, but it's like don't you feel like every year you have a little less energy for it, or like the view of
But
it,
for
like
what? For what?
just like any guy coming at you with bullshit, fucking a college loan officer calling, fucking people being rude to you in public, like you lose that thing to where your resilience towards it, or your resilience might change to like, because in my youth, like, somebody could completely fuck me over, and I'd be like, well, okay, that's going to be, like, fucking fine. It's going to be all right. It's just, like, going to be all right. Whereas these days, I'm just like, I will fuck you up. Like, we're calling the cops tonight. You know what I mean? Like,
Okay, my second question is, will you collect and publish Fag School sometime? Please.
Zines are so weird, because it's like, sometimes I'm like, yeah, I should do that, but then also like they're super historical in this way, and they're just for their time. And plus, like, when I was doing Fag School, like, it's different from a book, because really, like, Fag School was seriously intended for like 25 friends of mine. So I also think, like, well, did they stand the test of time? Like, would people buying it now even get those references from so long ago? Do I even get those references? But there's this kid, Jeff, who does Unity Mart. He's in that band Meat Market. Oh my God, he's this gay boy. He's like really hot. But he like started Unity Mart, and he does free zine printing for like queers and stuff, and so he wants to do the project one at a time. Also, in the 10 years I did Fag School, there's only like 4, so I guess I might as well.
The definitive volume.
Maybe a best of.
Huh?
Best of.
It's just the 4.
Okay, like maybe 2 more
Questions?
and I gotta pee.
Come on, there's some questions in the house. Yeah, see?
Earlier, you were mentioning, or you mentioned that I think Tennessee Williams was part of the inspiration behind your new book, and somebody else, and I'm forgetting the other person, of course, but
Tyler Perry.
Tyler Perry, thank you.
Medea.
I'm wondering, and I'm curious about other authors who've influenced you, and other perhaps literary artists who've influenced your thinking, your work, so forth and so on.
Okay, so growing up, like, I'm from that era of like fucking personal zines. Like I started, actually my first zine was when I was like 14, and I'd be mailing with people all over the country. Hunks, Seth Bogart, me and him were pen pals when he lived in Arizona and I lived in Alabama, and we were like sharing zines. I was in my high school was like the one other Black Riot girl in the entire southeast of America. Somehow me and her were in a band and we did zines. Me and Vice was living in Mobile. Like, but it was that pre-live journal shit, like when you actually had, it just changed the whole timbre of just like what personal writing meant to me. In 6th grade, I had a teacher who knew I was kind of depressed, and she gave me Sylvia Plath for some reason. Just like, well, you're a Black queer, here's a suicidal white bitch, you go work it out. Like, but like, to this day, I love her. My favorite Southern Gothic writer is Flannery O'Connor, of course. So like, what else? As a teenager, I read Doris. And I remember I was reading Doris when I was probably 16 or 17, and I just opened up to a random page, and it was just like, after I had my 3rd abortion, first sentence, and in my head I was just like, holy shit, like, you can write about anything you want. There was still kind of like, I wouldn't admit to being gay, wouldn't admit all this shit, but like when I saw that sentence, I was like, it's on, you know what I'm saying? So I come from this like background of like personal literature, i.e. zines, and like some of kind of these like intense, both feminist and Tennessee Williams, total faggot, like these fag writers. And so I don't know, it's a lot. It's a lot. It's a mix between like personal drama and intense humor. You know, people documenting. So that's, I think, my main influences.
But it's kind of great because, like, in a way, much like you make work, also you're informed by other I mean, the writing isn't just inspired by other writers. It's inspired by music. It's inspired by performance. Like, that's definitely very clear from the books themselves. Sure. One more cue from the A. Yeah, Carrie.
Hi.
Hey, my love.
Is this on? Oh, yeah. So, I liked the 100 Boyfriends mixtape a lot. That was fun. And I'm wondering what was the process of making that? Is it all fictional, or is it like using, like, are the people in it boyfriends?
Okay, thank you. All right. So,
You're welcome.
When I made the movie, and I'm writing, okay, so I'm doing the book 100 Boyfriends, but I'm also doing the book 100 Boyfriends mixtape, and everyone's like, oh, are you gonna write about like 100 boys? But it's actually like this concept of every time you date someone, you're dating the ghost of everyone they dated, and they're dating the ghost of everyone you dated. So this 100 Boyfriends is actually kind of like this nebulous telepathic idea that we pass all of our good stuff and abuses onto everyone all the time. So that's what the title is about. But wait, what were you asking? Oh, the process of making it. It actually was like this when I actually first wrote it, I just wanted it to be a movie, but like no one would give me money. But then I had did a film for Naked Sword, and like they were just like, if you put some dick sucking in it, we can fund it. So that actually was never supposed to happen. But I was just like, fuck it, why not? So I wrote it, but then of course, like a lot of it had to get tailored down into this like 15-minute movie. But I'm down.
Well, and more for the future to come.
And more for the future to come.
Wait, so are you saying it wasn't originally supposed to be a porn?
Originally, no.
It's so interesting because usually, like, well, so often, porn is like, there's the storyline is suffering or whatever. But I was thinking how beautiful the storyline was, and it's funny that it.
Well, I had did this movie, I Want Your Love, and at the time, I'm not sure where Naked Sword is with this right now, but like porn is like kink. Like actually, my new documentary, all of it was shot by like kink.com people, and a lot of it was shot at the Armory, because a lot of my friends make films there, and they're these girls who are just like, oh my God, all I do is shoot gangbangs all day. Oh, you're doing a fucking documentary? Oh, can we get on that and put that on our resume? Yeah, so I was like, hell yeah, So it's, yeah, but I think with Naked Sword, they were like having a hard time just selling regular porn, so they tried something else, which I think was very awesome of them. And I think I get the feeling that decision will benefit them more in the near future than like right at the present. But it was an awesome offering for them. So yeah, I didn't feel like I was, exploited or anything. I was happy to do it.
So Carrie asked about if people were real boyfriends or something, right? Yeah. So we still.
Oh, the casting. I definitely had hooked up with most of those dudes.
Was there a casting couch?
No, more like a casting bathroom at a bar.
Well, you're here for like a tour of sorts. What are some of the other events?
I'm doing
coming up?
Jibbs' thing the 9th, where I forget where it's at, but then I'm doing a reading the 11th at the Hollywood Standard.
So please put your hands together and thank Brontez.
I'm a good single.